He was born under the shadow of empire and grew to become the architect of a nation. Modibo Keïta entered the world on June 4, 1915, in Bamako, Koura, then part of the French colonial territory of Upper Senegal and Niger, long before the name Mali returned to the map. His lineage carried the echo of Sundiata Keita, the famed founder of the medieval Mali Empire, a heritage that infused his life with both symbolism and expectation. From the start, Keita's trajectory would be a negotiation between history and possibility, between inherited myth and modern politics. In a colonial system designed to extract and control, education became Keita's portal to agency. He excelled at primary school in Bamako and won entry to the École Normale William Ponty in Dakar, the crucible where many future African leaders were molded. At Ponty, he stood out, first in scholarship, then in the discipline of teaching, a profession that would shape his early career and his political temperament. Returning home, he taught in Bamako, Sikasso, and Timbuktu, learning the rhythms of ordinary lives and the gap between colonial policy and local aspirations. He came of age politically within the ferment of the post-war era, when African voices demanded to be heard in the language of rights and representation. In 1945, Keita co-founded the Sudanese Union, soon merging with the African Democratic Rally to become a formidable anti-colonial force that framed sovereignty not simply as the transfer of power, but as the redefinition of society. He became its Secretary General, a role that called for a blend of strategy and persuasion, insisting that independence would require not just ballots and banners, but a moral reordering of the state. Keita's vision was continental in ambition and meticulous in detail. He believed in African unity as a lever to break the structural dependencies imposed by colonial economies. In 1960, he assumed the presidency of the short-lived Mali Federation, an attempt to fuse Mali and Senegal into a single political entity, and pushed for a unified framework that could resist fragmentation and foreign leverage. The federation dissolved within months, a sobering lesson in the politics of sovereignty and the limits of idealism when national interests collide. When Mali declared independence in 1960, Keita became its first president, tasked with transforming a colonial territory into a republic with coherent institutions, dignified culture, and tangible opportunities. He espoused an African socialism that sought to align state-led development with communal ethics, nationalization of key sectors, promotion of cooperatives, and an emphasis on planning. This was not merely an imitation of external models. It was an attempt to craft a system responsive to Mali's realities, where market forces alone would not build roads to remote villages or irrigate fields along the Niger River. Yet the path was steep. Resources were limited, the infrastructure skeletal, and the weight of expectation immense. Keita located dignity not only in economics, but in cultural affirmation. He invested in education and state capacity, believing that a literate, confident populace could anchor a fairer economy and debate national choices with clarity. In foreign affairs, he walked a careful line, skeptical of neo-colonial entanglements, open to non-aligned collaboration, and proud of Mali's independence as more than a legal fact. His rhetoric was spare and principled. Sovereignty was a means to moral agency, not a cloak for inertia. Like many post-colonial leaders, Keita encountered the paradox of transformation. To move faster, he centralized. To distribute fairly, he regulated. To secure autonomy, he constrained markets. Over time, these measures strained relations with traders and some rural communities, and the economy struggled under administrative burdens and limited access to capital. The aspirations of state-led modernization faced headwinds, droughts, commodity fluctuations, and the enduring brittleness of new institutions. Keita's commitment to a planned economy met the unforgiving arithmetic of scarcity. He remained a teacher at heart, translating theory into social programs, seeking to persuade as much as command. But power in fragile states is a precarious instrument. On November 19, 1968, a military coup led by Moussa Traoré ended Keita's presidency, interrupting the experiment he had begun and inaugurating a new chapter marked by consolidation under the uniform. The coup did not merely change leadership. It shifted the national conversation from what Mali might invent to what it could endure. Keita's era closed in detention and silence, leaving the unfinished score of development and democracy to later generations. Keita's personal life reflected the complexity of a public figure navigating cultural continuity and modern governance. He married, raised a family, and remained anchored in Bamako, a city that was witness to his ascent, his projects, and his fall. The arc of his life ended on May 16, 1977, back in the capital where it had begun. A circle closed, not by triumph, but by consequence. His death did not extinguish the arguments he had advanced. It reframed them in the memory of a country still wrestling with the fiscal, political, and cultural questions he once tried to answer. To assess Keita honestly requires both empathy and rigor. He fused the promise of independence with the discipline of planning in a context where immediate results were rare and patience was politically costly. If his African socialism sometimes hardened into unwieldy bureaucracy, it also sought to protect citizens from the predations of unregulated markets and external dependency. He labored to turn sovereignty into something practical. Schools, cooperatives, institutions that could survive beyond charisma. Some did. Others faltered under resource constraints and administrative overreach. His critics saw centralization where he saw coordination, austerity where he saw stewardship. Yet even they acknowledged that state building in the early 1960s was less a choice than a necessity. Colonial infrastructures were designed for extraction, not development. Colonial boundaries engraved diversity into single polities without a blueprint for harmony. In this terrain, Keita's insistence on education and national pride offered scaffolding for a civic identity that could transcend ethnic and regional divides. The outcomes were uneven, but the intention was coherent. A republic that believed in itself enough to plan its future. Keita's legacy survives in debates more than monuments. Should development be driven by state planning or market dynamism? How does cultural renaissance inform economic policy? What does non-alignment mean when interdependence is inevitable? He framed these questions with urgency, believing that a young nation must choose deliberately or be chosen for by stronger powers. Later leaders would revise his approaches, but many of the dilemmas remained constants of Malian governance: rural inclusion, capital access, institutional resilience, and the balance between freedom and fairness. In the end, Modibo Keïta is not only a figure of history, he is a lens. Through him we glimpse the burden and bravery required to build a country from a colonial blueprint not designed for dignity. We hear the cadence of a teacher who believed that ideas could change material reality, and the restraint of a statesman who understood that sovereignty is earned daily in budgets, classrooms, and the trust of citizens. His story is a reminder that nationhood is not bestowed, it is constructed, imperfectly, earnestly, by those willing to argue with fate and policy alike. The map today carries the name Mali as a fact, but Keita treated it as a promise. He tried to convert history into architecture, to turn memory into policy. If his methods polarized and his outcomes were partial, the courage to attempt a new social order remains instructive. Between the myth of Sundiata and the machinery of a modern republic, Keita stood as interpreter, builder, and critic, an inaugural president who measured progress not in slogans, but in the hard work of changing the everyday. That work continues, and in its persistence, his voice still resonates.